Hello and welcome to another segment of the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be answering a question from our audience on are there historical examples that can provide insights into how empires decline? And we're going to take four other historical examples, and then we're going to talk about what we likely expect from America during its decline. The first example to talk about is the Roman Empire. And I think it's fair to say that the Roman Empire declined for a variety of reasons, one of which is that it overextended itself. And it overextended itself because it was very successful early on. I think it was actually very impressive that it managed to expand its borders as much as it did, just because things like communication, transportation technology wasn't anywhere near as advanced as it is today. So holding together an empire like that for the centuries that it did was very impressive. I think that a major reason it declined, aside from the expansion, was something related to the expansion, which is it absorbed a lot of different populations, and it didn't really fully Romanize those populations. Like, you had a lot of people from a lot of different groups considering themselves Romans whenever they were allowed Roman citizenship, but they had different cultural practices and they weren't properly assimilated within the Roman Empire. And so you saw that there was a major splitting where the people of the Roman Empire didn't have as much of a connection to each other once the Roman borders kept being expanded further and further and further out. And so I think that was a major problem. And you actually see this pretty consistently across empires as well, where you have to make sure that you assimilate various people into your country if you're going to be taking over those borders. An example I might be able to give here is Italy. I'm at least partially Italian. I'm Greek, Italian, and Jewish. And the Italian peninsula really was fragmented city-states, and they didn't really consider themselves to be Italian. They considered themselves to be Roman or Calabrian or Sicilian or Venetian or Genoan. I don't know how to pronounce it. Genovese. Whatever that place is called, right? But in order to create a Italian identity, you need to not only have an Italian language, but you need to make sure that these people viewed themselves as Italian instead of viewing themselves as some other grouping. And the Roman Empire, I don't feel like did an overly good job of having a shared culture and having shared values. And because of that, it really did disband. It overextended itself and it couldn't control its borders. It became a lot less productive. Its people became less willing to work for the empire because it represented too many different things. And so this empire declined for some similar reasons that I will talk about when I'm talking about America as well. The next empire worth talking about here is the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom's decline was actually really nice because they accepted their decline. They really didn't want to be the world police anymore. They were exhausted from it. They're a tiny island nation. And for them, they saw themselves as passing on the mantle to another nation. And so they actually liked that because the other nation was an Anglo-culture nation as well, which was America. And so United Kingdom had a very slow, calm decline. Just kind of like turning out the lights slowly. It was just like, it was very pleasant. It was probably the most pleasant decline of the ones on this list. And I feel kind of bad for them because the United States didn't really treat them overly well after they declined and after they passed on the mantle to the United States. But the United Kingdom had the most peaceful decline on this list. The next one is the Soviet Union. And, I should mention with the United Kingdom is they declined because they were just too small to be holding all the territory that they were holding. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, they had a relatively cohesive population, but they were the first, what I would consider multicultural world power. And when I talk about multicultural world power, I mean they specifically fragmented the population into various groups instead of trying to assimilate them into one cohesive whole. So you had like Chechens here, and then you had Ukrainians here, and then you had the Polish over there. In a typical empire, you would try to assimilate those people. You would try to make sure they had similar cultures, similar languages, similar religions, etc., etc. Soviet Union just put each of them into their kind of own little autonomous zones and hoped for the best. And what you see is that as soon as times became difficult, these zones just kind of broke off. It wasn't really a violent. I mean, there were certain violent difficulties afterwards with like the Chechen wars and things like that, but like for the most part, the Soviet Union collapse, it was really just a matter of they were facing hard times. It might have even been temporary hard times, but if you have people that don't really have anything in common, then as soon as hard times happen, they're just going to fracture. And that's exactly what you saw from the Soviet Union. So all these different various republics that were not in any way, shape, or form assimilated, because Soviet Union really believed in kind of multiculturalism instead of assimilation, these places just broke off. And that's, again, another element that you're going to see when I talk about the United States. Then you have Yugoslavia, which to a certain extent, Yugoslavia was dismantled from the outside. But this was a place where these people had a lot of genetic roots in common. They were all Slavic people, genetically pretty much cousins to each other, but they had different religions and different cultural practices. And because of that, Yugoslavia fragmented, and you saw people who were widely distributed, widely spread out, moving to places that were more ethnic enclaves once the various Balkan republics ended up forming. And so those are the various empires that we have to look at when discussing America and what's going to happen with America. Now, the United States, given the insights we got from these other nations, the United States is likely not going to have a quiet, peaceful decline like the United Kingdom. Sure, to a certain extent, we're seeing that right now, but once China surpasses it, and once the United States is not really able to keep up its military and economic dominance, you're going to see the knives come out. You're going to see a lot of nations that have historical grudges against the United States not just let them go at that point. You're going to see people within the United States not going to be particularly satisfied with the fact that they're not going to get as good of a life as their ancestors did. They're like, well, wait, what about me? Like, the baby boomers had it so good. Why is millennial, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, why are we all suffering? Like, why don't we have the good times that the baby boomers had? And so you're going to see a lot of instability, and I would say violence is pretty likely to occur, even though we're not promoting it. We think that's a bad thing on this channel. But United Kingdom, that's not going to be an example that is particularly similar to the United States. It's just the factors are nearly completely different, even though they have a similar Anglo-culture. The Roman Empire, you can see some similarities there in that the United States overextended itself. It overexpanded, and to a large extent, it willfully took on new populations that initially it did try to assimilate, and I do think that despite America not intentionally assimilating people, it does assimilate people into the kind of consumeristic mentality through its media and entertainment propaganda arms. And so you're seeing a lot of the same instability, a lot of the same fracturing that occurred with the Roman Empire is likely to occur with the United States, in that you have a lot of people with different cultural practices that are not going to get along whenever the times are not good. And even more so, similar to the Soviet Union, where you have people where the United States really inherited the multicultural elements of the Soviet Union. I don't know exactly how that happened. That's something I'll probably explore in more detail in the future. I believe it has something to do with things like the Frankfurt School, but I'll study that more in the future. But United States used to be a melting pot. It used to be an assimilation nation where people like me, I'm of Italian descent, Italian, Greek, and Jewish. None of them spoke English initially. They came to the United States and they assimilated and became Americanized. And that's the assimilation process, the melting pot process. But in modern times, weirdly enough, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States inherited the multicultural elements of the Soviet Union, and they quit assimilating people. And now everyone is people are not Americans anymore. They're whatever group that they want to be a part of, and they might tack on American at the end. So they're Hispanic American, or they're Mexican American specifically, or they're African American, et cetera, et cetera. People don't really consider themselves to be just American anymore. You're even seeing a white identity being formed, where you're seeing people being like German American or European American, et cetera, et cetera. But that identity politics, that tribalism, you're seeing really does resemble the Roman Empire to a certain extent, and even more so the Soviet Union. Now, where it gets interesting is the Yugoslavia elements, because the Soviet Union, despite their problems with having a multicultural element, they at least had pretty clear-cut, defined borders between the various people. I mean, they would move people if they didn't like where they were currently located. They would just move the entire population. But Yugoslavia had people spread out across borders within Yugoslavia, across future borders, and they figured out how to make it work after the violence, after the civil war within Yugoslavia and the fragmentation of Yugoslavia. And I think there's some elements of that you have to consider, you have to think about when discussing the United States, because right now we can't envision what the United States is going to look like after a splitting of the United States because of the animosity, the tension between various factions in the United States. And Yugoslavia might serve as a pretty good example of what that would look like. People would just pick up and move. They would cede certain territory, depending on where it's located, depending on wanting various areas to have a cohesive, consistent border connecting areas. But I think you can look at all four of these other declining empires and pick and choose various elements that are going to be important to understand when understanding the current decline of America. And so if you found this video to be insightful, please like the video. And if you want to hear more from me, please subscribe to our channel. I also read all the comments in the comments box. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please leave them there and I will respond in whatever form is necessary. I might even make a video of it like I did for this question. And I thank you for sticking with us, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.